Thanks for joining us. I'm Jonathan Fisher. Most companies would love to win more of those bigger, whale sized accounts, but most understand that you get them as often as possible, but it's not necessarily something that you can predict or scale. But what if it is? What if you could implement a process that would make winning those enterprise sized accounts as predictable and scalable as any other channel of business? Well, our guest today claims that you can do just that. Ryan Staley first made his name as a highly successful sales professional and mastered the art and science of winning 7 and even 8 figure accounts. And today he spends his time helping CEOs and revenue leaders of all types of businesses do the same. Ryan, fantastic to have you on the Evolve Sales Leader today. Welcome.
Yeah, happy to be on the show, Jonathan. Looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, we're gonna have a great conversation. Well, and before we jump in, I wonder, could you just share a little bit? How did you come by the insights that you use to help other companies every day? Give us kind of the short background, if you would.
How did I come by? Okay, so one of the really unique things is I always work for companies that were resource constrained, and I had some good leaders that I work with, but I never worked for a really large organization that had massive infrastructure. So one of the things that I did that was really helpful was that I started to model what I saw as the best possible people at different things, and then refined it and added my own kind of turns and twists to it as experience presented itself. So I did that, and then I continually optimized it over time. I started at one of the most simplest jobs. It was inside sales, making $250 a day. Then I rose through the ranks as a rep, then an enterprise rep, then a leader, manager, then a director, VP, partner, and now I have my own business. So basically, that was kind of the road in which it happened. And one of the other things that was really critical was just so many reps, so much time, and it was very helpful. And then that's kind of how I orchestrated like what happened, and the best way to do it, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, being an observer of those who are getting it done is an important part of success for anybody. It's mistakes are a great teacher as well as successes, and especially if it's from someone else. So you've made it kind of your forte to help win bigger accounts on a predictable basis. Um, and you really seem like you're the kind of guy that keeps your ear to the ground to see the most current ways to do that. A lot of authors that I even have on the show, a lot of the insights we're discussing may come from 5, 10, 15 years ago of experiences, and that they're certainly valid. But I love guys that try to stay cutting edge. So today's conversation, I think, is going to have that as a backdrop. There's been a lot of technological developments that are going to directly impact how to implement what we're going to learn. But I wonder, could you share with us what are the main things that are stopping most B2B companies from getting whale-sized accounts? We'll just call them that. We always call them that, right? Get those big whales. What's stopping folks from making that predictable?
Yeah, so there's a couple different components. So one of them I would say is targeting, right? So a lot of organizations think they need to develop a whole entire different org, which you can go that way if you're flush with cash, right? However, there's a way where you could gradually move up market that minimizes the risk, just like a balanced portfolio of investments. And so one of the things that I always work with and share with my clients, I've written posts about this, is if you want to move up market, one of the simplest ways without changing anything else is to look at the top 20% of your ICP in terms of the biggest deals you've won, the fastest deals you've won, and the biggest ones that you've lost. And what you'll get from that, if you actually take a couple of hours and look through that with your executive team or your team in general, if you're a leader, is that even if you're a solo business owner, you're going to see insights, weird trends, and outliers when you look at it from demographics to the people involved to the outcomes created. And there's going to be weird outliers in there that'll make deals go faster and that are much bigger. So that's step number one. Step number two is, I think, another big mistake is when organizations or people, what they do is they only look at the process, right? Or they only look at the execution. Those two things, those are ingrained in like MedPick and the Challenger sale, and they're all inward facing. Really, if you look at it, it's all about. It's kind of like going on a first date and then not asking the other person anything about themselves and really understanding emotionally, where they're at in the stage of their life. And so one of the things that I've seen work really well is orchestrating the emotional understanding and relationships and political dynamics within an organization on top of the process and the execution pieces, which some companies focus on. So that's number two. And then number three, it's funny. I see so many companies like wasting revenue every single month because they're not systemizing customer to prospect referrals. And so why that's critical is they create pipeline that closes sometimes in half the amount of time at a conversion rate, 150% of a normal opportunity. And by not systemizing that, you're literally lighting money on fire because you're not taking advantage of all that relationship, trust, and equity that you've built up to multiply, clone, and expand your top 10 biggest and best customers, or top 10%, top 20% biggest and best customers.
So is it like a mental block? Do you think that these leaders are just assuming because they're small in number, these are like unicorns in some way? Like what's the holdup in your experience?
Well, so what I would say on the targeting side, it's just lack of attention and focus on it. I think what happens if you look at revenue leaders, which I work with a lot of revenue leaders. I'm friends with revenue leaders, so like, and I was a revenue leader, so I understand that better than anybody else because one of the things that happens is like it's a demanding job, and so it's hard sometimes to step back and focus on these different areas because you're running so hard. And if you're not presenting to the board, if you're not presenting to the founder or CEO or the working with the executive team, you're expected to be with your team, coaching them, mentoring them, even being on appointments. So there's a massive, I guess you could say, attention dispersion or task switching cost that happens when you're in that role because it's really hard to focus on the strategic initiatives of the job, of the organization, and of what's happening. And so, like, when I was revenue leader, one of the things that made the biggest transition for that is I started specifically blocking just like think time, right? The time where I could just sit and look at like numbers, metrics, optimizations, ways we can get better without any meeting, without being an open door. And it was really, really eye opening. So I think that's probably the biggest reason why. That's one. And then the second biggest reason why is sometimes people don't know what they don't know, right? There's not a lot of written methodologies on this out there. I haven't published mine publicly yet, although that's probably something I'm going to do in the future with certain areas of these things. And so I think part of it is not knowing, part of it's not having like the time, focus, and attention, mental space to be able to execute on it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably a whole other conversation we could have about working as a team and maybe bringing in some support for those producers on the front end. But thinking as a sort of a chief revenue officer myself, in my experience, I feel like when you're looking at some of these larger accounts, they do feel like they're each so unique. So maybe that's held me back. Like, how do I systematize going after this very unique situation? I'm never going to see that again. Like, have you noticed that with some leaders, and how do you kind of overcome that when we're dealing with a smaller data set? And I'll make this a hybrid question. The other one is this too. We're trying to be as efficient as possible. We're kind of looking for the middle of that curve, right? In terms of the data, maybe we kind of avoid the wings, thinking, well, there's not a lot there. Like a lot of folks, for example, are not following up as avidly as they once did because it's like it's another 5 or 8% of revenue, but come on, 5 or 8% of revenue actually could cost me if that's taken away from my core
Right.
processes. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I guess like if I'm looking and I'm thinking through this one here because I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. So because I had the perfect answer and for some reason I'm having a brain fart right now lined up because I was trying to intently listen to exactly what you were saying and be deep in the moment. And as a result of that, I lost my train of thought. But what I would say is that oh yeah, here I found it. Okay, so what it is
Nice.
like if you look at like, and I get what you're saying. Every big deal is a one-off, right? But one of the things that I discovered, and this was like, it was funny because it was a blessing but a curse, right? So I had a small team. I didn't have a massive team. I had 4 sales reps, and we grew from 0 to 30 million in 5.5 years, right? So I was involved in a lot of the deep tactical work as well as the strategic work. So I had both sides of it. And one of the unique things that I saw happen was there's patterns that happen every single time with the way that organizations make decisions. And those patterns are really based on what I would say is like maybe two core areas of strategy that you look at. There's the business strategy, which is the larger the deal size, the more you have to lean into logic because there's a larger frame of people that are going to look at it. I think from the most recent reports, it's now up to like 12 or 14 different people are involved in a deal, down or up from like 10 from a few years ago, right? So there's the logic. So the business case has to be rock solid with tangible outcomes from both a value and a monetary perspective. So that's one. Then the other strategy is the emotional strategy. And this is what people are like, oh, well, that's not predictable. It actually is in a lot of aspects, because of the fact that humans operate based on human nature and principles of how men and women work. And so if you look at that, like, and I'll give you a specific example. For example, if you look at an organization, you're going to see that every individual in an organization, for the most part, larger companies, that you would want to sell these larger deals to, have KPIs that they're evaluated on. So key performance indicators that basically identify whether they're doing a really good job or a really bad job. And these affect whether they get promoted, demoted, or bonuses, right? So one of the key things is understanding that at a horizontal level. So from like the C-level, VP, director, and manager down, and then horizontally for the other people that in the other departments that are integrated into that. And so by understanding that, you know, from a business logic perspective, what's really motivating. So that's the first one. On the emotional side, like the second piece to it, so that's driving them emotionally at work. The second piece is, what are they passionate about? And what I mean by that is you could really easily understand that by this one simple question. You want me to share it with you? It's really simple. It's only one question.
Please.
Okay. So the one simple question is, what is your favorite thing to do outside of work when you have free time? Because most of the executives and people that you're selling large deals to are fully committed to their job, and you're going to get one of two answers. They're either just going to tell you, which mostly doesn't happen, or they're going to say, oh, well, I just spend time with my family, right? I really appreciate my family. That's the default. And so then the next question is, okay, well, if you're not spending time with your family and you have free time, what would you do, right? The reason why this question is important is I can't tell you how many different answers I've gotten that people will talk about their favorite hobby, their favorite passion for 30 minutes, an hour, and you start to really understand what's important to them outside of work, which drives what's important to them inside of work. Okay. Also, how to connect with them and be fun and connect with them at an emotional level about something that they really care about. I'll give you an example. It was a Fortune 500 company. I asked that question, the very exact question, at an event to him. And he's just like, well, you know, one of the things that I really appreciate doing is photography. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, for what kind of photography? And he's like, waterfalls. He's like, we travel 2 times a year to obscure places across the world, like Iceland. Not that Iceland's obscure, but like remote places. So I could take pictures of these different waterfalls. And then he showed me his private Instagram account where he had all these pictures of these different waterfalls with drones. And he was talking on and on about them. What kind of a connection and memory do you think he has of me at that situation versus someone he just met at the show and talked all business?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Love that.
It's black and white. It's totally different. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, it almost sounds like what you're saying is that there's the old sales wisdom that people make their decisions emotionally and then they validate them rationally. I think that probably still holds in many sales situations, but it almost sounds like you're arguing that when it comes to enterprise selling, you might need to reverse the order of those two, have a really super strong business case. But it's not as though that's going to replace the emotional element. You're still going to have to bring that in and have some smart ways to do that. Is that on point? Would you agree? And how would you maybe amplify that?
I just think you got to have both, right? So you have to nail both. I think most with larger deals, they neglect the emotional side because they're like, oh, well, you're going to save $20 million. Well, there's 3 other vendors that will save you $20 million, so it doesn't matter, right? They have options in the marketplace because let's face it. I mean, SaaS is exploding. SaaS is eating the world now. AI is eating the world, right? And so truly, you could literally like find ways in which that's relevant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, when it comes to making that human connection, I mean, you could have the best business case. If the other guy has maybe even a slightly inferior business case, but you made the human connection, he might win. I definitely think that would happen. What about when you're dealing with so many stakeholders, as you alluded to earlier? You've got 8, 10, 12, maybe 15 people involved. How does that interact with these important aspects of connecting on the human level?
Well, it's what I just said multiplied times the amount of people, right? So I think, however, like the best way to kind of approach it so it's not overwhelming, because it's probably like, okay, how am I going to develop 12 emotional connections to 12 people
Right.
times 30 accounts, right? And so like that's where the prioritization comes in. If you prioritize like who are the if I could only pick 3 people to do this with, and you could do it beyond 3, but usually there's like 3 or 4 people you get really tight with. The type of people that if you connect with them deep enough, they'll give you insights they won't give anybody else. They'll tell you the competitor's pricing. They'll give you all sorts of tips and tricks on how to win the deal, right? So even if sometimes you're not the best business solution, you're the best solution for that organization, because if they make the wrong decision, they could literally get fired. The reason why they're telling you that data is because you've built trust with them, right? So I would say like the prioritization is a really effective way to do that and understand the KPIs of how they're evaluated and motivated at work, and then how are they motivated and what lights them up outside of the work, and really master that. And like, I'll give you a real world example. So the first enterprise deal I got was with a company called Towers Watson, right? And it was really interesting because I was working this deal. They're really geographically dispersed, very siloed organization back then. And one of the things that happened was I was like working with an executive in finance who was like a regional director of finance, right? And he's like, yep, we're ready to go. He goes, but one of the things is we just hired a new director of procurement, and that person needs to review the deal, right? So you're like, oh, geez, what's going to happen here? That's like a death sentence for anyone in sales.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that happened was like, this is a while back. I mean, this is probably like 18, 20 years ago. But one of the things that was really unique about it was that we didn't have travel wasn't really, I was supposed to be a regional rep, so I wasn't allowed to really travel. And so I had to build a relationship with him completely over Zoom or video without physically seeing him, taking him out, things like that. And so what I did is I systematically, every time I had an interaction with him, I chipped away, understood more about him as a person, as well as what was important to him at work, to the point where he's like, hey, Ryan, he's like, we got into the whole KPI thing and the business thing. And he shared with me like, hey, I get bonused if this happens, but not if this happens. Right. So he shared that with me. He told me about really deep personal stuff that he never did. And I never met him live in person. And I think a lot of people today don't do that either organizationally or as a rep, because you're just like, oh, it's over Zoom. I don't have time to build relationships, or I can't build relationships over Zoom.
Hmm.
I have to be in person. So that's just one example, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I do think a lot of professionals probably do hold back a little bit when they feel like the technology is between the two individuals. But I think we're all also getting a little bit more used to the fact that you can get to know each other pretty well. I mean, it really is. It's just a matter of familiarity and intentionality, is what it sounds like you're saying. So when you're dealing with these larger groups in a company, um, do you come at it with some idea of how, like, who's really driving the decision? Do you have some tips and tricks onto how to quickly analyze that? Because it's never a one-to-one with whatever the titles are, right? In a given business decision, it's more to do with personality dynamics. Do you have some ideas on how to quickly pick up on that for the producers listening on the call?
Yeah. So if you're looking at like personality dynamics, like if you don't understand DISC at a deep level, you should really, really understand that. And so are you familiar with DISC, Jonathan, at all, or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you know it, right? So it's
It's a
basically
great tool.
yeah, dominant, influential, supportive, and then like conscientious are kind of the 4 buckets. There's variations of those, but
Right.
those are the core concepts, right? And so like with that, like what I would do, and there's really easy tools to do this. So look at like your top like 5 favorite people or top 10 favorite people that you've worked with at clients, and either you could even get a temporary license with like humantic.ai or Crystal Knows, and it'll analyze like their exact disc profile. So why you want to do that is because what it'll do is it'll tee up the commonality with personality profiles of people that got stuff done for you. How are they made up? what type of personality like mix that they had. And so like one of the things that we found was that the people that got the job were like a high D, right? So they were a dominant driver, who was ready to make change, wanted to focus on the high level details, not all the minutia, right? And so you're going to find there's certain buyer profiles like that personality type that you work really, really well with. And so I would say that's one aspect for the person that drives the deal. I literally just wrote a post about this 2 days ago on LinkedIn. They got a great response. But the other is understanding, not who just people always like, well, what's your budget, or whose budget is this, right?
Hmm.
And we lost an $18 million deal because we understood whose budget it was currently, but we didn't understand whose new budget this would be in after they signed the deal, which, believe it or not, was completely different. And so we lost an $18 million deal with that, went through like a 18-month process, law and RFP, because there was one person we didn't have access to that basically influenced that, because that was going to be within their budget afterwards that nobody told us and tipped us off on. So highly, highly recommend that you understand not just whose budget it is now, but whose budget will be after you implement, and make sure you align with that person.
Ask more questions. The Chick-fil-A is eat more chicken. In sales, it's ask more questions, right? Well, that's a really great illustration of needing to know the lay of the land. So disc profile, I'm a big fan of disc. I love Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
I make it an armchair hobby to guess people's letters by just asking them some questions. So yeah, the more you know about human personality and social dynamics, the better. Is that something you would advise the leader listening to our podcast to maybe even implement in an intentional way, maybe have some internal training on these issues?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Cause like, uh, and it's going to help you lead better as a leader. So like, for example, we did training on it, and then we had everyone take the test on the team, and then we had them put that on their cubicle. Right. So I know there's a lot of remote work, but you could create a frame of what the teammates profile is, because what that helps you do as an organization is communicate more effectively with each other, right? And understand each other at a deeper level. So you're going to get like a synergistic byproduct of organizational leadership better if you implement that. Well, at the same time, you'll start to classify and be like, oh, shoot, like this person, like, for example, say this person isn't a driver, but they're the lead on this opportunity. And you could almost predict that the sales process is going to take 3 months longer, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's that insightful, because once again, it goes back to the nature of how they operate as a human being, no matter whether you're there or not, just how they make decisions, how they interact. And so that's going to be super, super insightful. You could probably do it like you can find stuff online. It's not super complicated. Like you just need the high level core concepts. You don't need to be like an amazing expert. And then you'll find, do you want me to give an example of like how this get illustrated? This is a real life example I went through with Dips.
Please.
Okay. So this is super simple. So like I'm a high D, right? High driver, I make fast decisions. I like the executive summary view. I don't like every single detail or I get lost in it, right? And so I was with my wife. We were going to buy a car. And I went to, I asked the salesperson one question. I'm like, I don't even remember what the question was, but it was very high level to understand what was going on with the car we were looking at. We were looking at like an Affinity SUV. And I was like, okay, so explain to me XYZ. And this was probably 7 years ago. So I don't remember the exact question. And this guy went on to explain not only that answer, but every single other answer. And he talked for like 5 minutes straight, right? Give me every single detail. And I was like ready to jump out the window, right? And that's just how he communicated with me. What he said could have been flawless, right? It could have been like spot on, amazing, but I didn't want to hear it, right? So it turned me off. Now, the other way, let's say it was the opposite. Let's say I was someone that was like a high C who really loved the details and loved the data and everything. And let's say I was trying to sell to myself who was a high C, or that guy was trying to sell to me and I was a high C. And he only gave me like, the executive summary. I would be suspicious of him because he wasn't giving me the details that I wanted. Right. So that's just how important this is and how critical it is. It's like the difference of, does the executive want a 3-line summary email, or do they want, 2 paragraphs and 15 bullet points on what happens? And that's the key to unlocking and understanding that, not just from a communication perspective, but from presentations, questions, all those different areas. And so that's how insightful I believe it is.
I love it. Well, I think we've given our listener an awful lot of insight here, lots of golden nuggets on how to up our game, how to segment out, silo out a better list of potential clients, build maybe a separate ICP, and kind of up our whole skill set around tackling these types of accounts. I wonder if I could now challenge you as we're getting into this final third of our time together here. Um, to give the listener, Ryan, what would be, say, 3 to 5 steps that they could go and implement like right away to start to go chase more whales on a more process-based approach?
And do you want this from like a rep perspective or a leader perspective? What are you thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, I do. Yes. You love that answer,
So
right? Yeah. If you can give us maybe a combo of maybe a little bit of each, if you don't mind.
Okay. So strategically, I would start with the targeting. And so go through the process I talked about earlier, where you look at your top 5 biggest wins, your top 5 fastest wins, your top 5 biggest losses, and even your top 5 um, slowest wins, if you will, right? Look through those, write down the company, the size of the company, who is involved, and then the outcomes you created, as well as the revenue, and then time to close. Just by doing that alone, you could basically pull it. The real interesting thing is amazing. You can pull it from your CRM, export it, filter it, and you could probably do that in 15 minutes, right? But
Right.
then look at the data and enrich it in like a Zoom Info or Apollo. You'll have all the revenue numbers and industries and everything. So super simple process you can do. If you do that alone on the targeting and you redefine what your ICP is with your perfect customer profile, those are like your largest. And then what you do, so that's step 1. So identify it, get all the data, probably take about 15 minutes, take another 45 minutes and identify, what are the weird outliers? What's going on there? Any trends or patterns you see? Like, for example, there was a customer I was working with, and they were selling to 14 different verticals because they had a horizontal solution, whereas 87% of their revenue came from 3 verticals, right? So it's like, why are we focused on everything equally if 87% of our revenue comes from only 3 verticals, right? So there's
Hmm.
situations like that you'll see that come to the surface. The other thing is, so that's step 1, because if you do that, everything that you do, that you put in your pipeline, will be bigger. It'll start to get bigger by design, and it'll start to close faster because you looked at the speed and size combos, right? Next thing is actuate that, just like you would a balanced portfolio. So to mitigate the risk or reduce the risk, only what you want to do is take, like, maybe start off with 30% of that perfect customer profile and the rest of it being a basic, your ICP. So then that way you offset the risk with, while you're upskilling for those deals to keep bringing in the mid-sized deals that you're already bringing in. So that's kind of the targeting and how I would redefine who I'm going after. So that's step 1. I would actuate that. That's super easy. Step 2 is like, I think if you're in a company and there's other departments or historical data of people that have closed those deals, reverse engineer what they've done. Like, I did that as a rep. We had no training infrastructure. I had like 4 managers in 2 years. And so I talked to the top performing rep, because he would work 30 hours a week and hit 130% of his quota. And I was working, 70 hours a week and hitting 100% of my quota. So you'll find out clues and trends from that. That's another one. Step 3, I guess, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Most companies have a sales process as well as like sales enablement. Like, what questions do I ask along the way? And what I would do is also add that emotional component. Start to ask questions around, like, like what KPIs you're evaluated by, right? So what are the top 2 or 3 things that are most important? Like, what are you evaluated by, right? And then also throughout the process, understand, like, is this person interested in getting promoted? Do they want to move to another job? Like, what's their end game with what they're doing? And just by understanding that, and if you link the solution back to it, you're going to be different than 99% of the other sales reps that they talk to, or sales organizations. That's another one. I think I'm on 4. Four would be one is quantify the outcomes that they will create. Do it on the first appointment if you can. And so, what I mean by that is really simple questions you could ask for that. But a lot of times, understand, okay, like for example, say we're looking to improve processes by, let's just say, an HR hiring system. I'm just making this up, right? Okay, I did this with the client. I'm like, okay, you're improving that. You want to make that improvement, and quantify down is like, okay, what's the tangible outcome you want? Well, we want to reduce hiring by, let's say, a week, right? It's 3 weeks. We want to cut it to 2 weeks. Okay, what's, if you did that across your organization, what would be the benefit? Well, we would be able to do twice as many new hires in, I don't know, 2/3 of the time. I'm making up numbers that don't make any sense, but you get the concept, right? And so then basically you back into quantifiable metrics, attach it to the outcome, and then bring it to a real number, right? So if you do that and hire in 2/3 the amount of time, how much money does that mean for your organization that you could save outside of time? Well, we would save $50,000, for every 3 hires across 10 hires. That's $500,000, right? That's a simple way to back into it tangibly. So do that for everyone. And then last but not least, I might add a bonus one too, is systemize referrals. Start asking referrals in a systemized way. It is the simple and easiest way to create pipeline, as long as you are diligent and have the same rigor that you do with the sales process. And my bonus one is spend some time every day, if you're a sales rep, looking at how you could leverage ChatGPT or Midjourney and integrate it into what you're doing to save time, or serve your customers better. If you're a leader, have a task group. Basically, task your team to spend a half hour a day on this, and then share best practices weekly. And an example, I did this alone. Found out I was going to pay someone $600 for a service. Found an AI solution that could do it for $30. And the vendor's turnaround was 2 days. This turnaround was 15 minutes, and the quality was better. So those are 5 ways plus a bonus for 6.
Wow, I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a great recipe for success on this front. And yeah, this whole area of integrating AI and other the cutting edge technologies that are related is something we all need to have more of our attention and focus on. And I think you and I are going to have a future conversation on that front as well. So to the listeners, stay tuned. We'll have Ryan back to speak on that. In the meantime, I know many of our listeners would like to go further with you, Ryan. Obviously, there's your website, which I believe is ryanstaley.io. What else do you have for the listener to go further with some of your insights and concepts?
Yeah, so I have a podcast too called The Scale Up Show, where I interview SaaS CEOs, and I'm going to start sharing episodes like this on my podcast as well, where I have kind of my best of. So that's one thing, and then so I would say check out the podcast. I'm active on LinkedIn, and then also we can include basically a free guide that I put together, aiforrevenue.com/cc. And basically what you'll see is like, it's some amazing content that's integrating these concepts with AI. And I gave you the finished product of what it looks like. So then you can see what's possible, but then also immediately and actionably use it. So yeah, that's the best way.
Well, I love it. Well, good stuff. Ryan, it's been a fantastic conversation, chock full of value. Thanks so much for being on the Evolve Sales Leader and being such a valuable benefit to our listener.
Yeah, Jonathan, thanks for having me on, man. It was a blast.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you to our listeners for making the show such a success. Make sure you tune in each week to check out the latest insights from our fantastic roster of guests. If you have been enjoying the content on the show, don't forget we've got an entire library for you over at our podcast, which is called the Evolve Sales Leader. Anywhere you like to get podcasts, check it out. And also a big thank you to our sponsor, Overpass. Overpass.com is a fantastic solution for getting phone-based talent quickly and economically. It's free to set up your account as a hiring manager. You could have a team of 5 SDRs in as many days and at very low cost. Check them out at overpass.com. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Evolve Sales Leader. Once again, signing off, this is Jonathan Fisher. Thanks for being with us on the show today. Take care, everybody.